Ah, okay.
Okay, there we go. And the source sheet's back.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So in a little bit we'll get to what Rabbi Blau had to say about the parsha. Um, Parshat Ki Teitzei is again in the context of Moshe Rabbeinu's extended speech in Sefer Devarim. We have a whole slew of mitzvot in the parsha, according to the Rambam, according to those who count. This is the parsha with the most mitzvot of any other parsha in the Torah. I think the
Oh,
Rambam has 72 by his count, if I'm remembering correctly. Um,
wow.
so there's a lot to talk about. You know, any one of those mitzvot could be a shir in itself. What Rashi does, we might have spoken about this in a previous year, is Rashi tries to connect and find a logical sort of narrative arc between the various mitzvot that appear. So it opens with Eshet Yifat Toar, the law of the captive woman in war. And then it goes on to discuss the laws of inheritance. If a man has more than one wife, he cannot favor if the non-firstborn son, the non-Bechor, is the son of a favored wife. Nonetheless, he can't favor that son when it comes to bequeathing his estate. And then we have discussion of the Ben Sorer Umore, the wayward and rebellious son. So Rashi says, what happens if you go to war and you take a captive woman, then you'll wind up with a son that is, from this woman you married out of lust that you'll favor in some way, but it's not your firstborn son, and you'll favor that firstborn son. And the end result is you'll have a son who becomes a wayward and rebellious child. And he tries, there's several places in his commentary where he tries to make, tie the dots and
Oh, my.
connect all the different points. Um, so actually, we'll see that this the mitzvah we're going to look at is connected, is part of this string of logic that Rashi tries to develop at the beginning of the parsha. But we're jumping a little bit ahead of ourselves. The Torah tells us in chapter 21, verses 22 to 23. V'ki be'ish chet mishpat mavet v'humat v'talita oto al etz. If a person commits a sin and is subject to capital offense, right? Is capital punishment. He's killed. So you right, vitalita oto al eitz. In such a situation, you hang the person, right? So many point out you don't the death penalty is not carried out by hanging, but rather after the person is killed, you then for a period of time leave the body on display, as it were. Hang the body to show to publicize what happened. All right, presumably as a way of discouraging other people from doing similar things. But then the Torah continues, Lo talin nivlato al ha'etz, ki tavor tikbarenu b'yom hahu. Do not leave the corpse hanging on the tree for an extended period of time. Rather, you should bury it on that same day. Ki kilalat Elohim talui. This is a very difficult phrase to translate. We're going to spend a lot of time trying to make sense of it. I'll just read what the English says here. An impaled body is an affront to God. I don't love that translation at all, but that's what the JPS gives us. An
I don't
impaled.
either.
Okay, good. We're in good company then. Um, V'lo titma et admatcha asher Hashem Elokecha notin lecha nachala, and thereby you will not defile the land which the Lord your God is giving you as an inheritance. Okay, so we have this prohibition of what's called in halachic literature lo talin. Do not leave it out. Do not let it. Do not let the corpse remain um, hanging for an extended period of time, or even for one night. Right? You have to bury it on that same day. And so this is also, right, and we're going to talk specifically about this prohibition against leaving it hanging, but this is the source that we have for trying to bury as quickly as possible, right? Not right in all situations. We try to bury as quickly as possible. So that's and that's definitely an offshoot of what we're going to talk about tonight. Okay, so this phrase ki kilalat Elokim talui. Literally, right? Kilalat, the curse of God is hanging. I think that's a more literal, also doesn't make much sense. The Rashbam tells us in number 2, ki kilalat Elohim talui, kisheroin b'nei adam et hatalui, regilin lekalel et hadayanim. Um, the word Elohim can be translated in many different ways. We think of Elohim as God, right? And it does mean God. It's a name of God and it means God. But Elohim can also mean judge or judges. So the Rashbam understands that it will lead, if you leave the body exposed and out in public for too long, it will lead people to curse the judges, to curse the judicial system that allowed such a punishment to be carried out. O krovim shalahorit shel harug, o shar b'nei adam, lefi shepamim al avera mu'etet hu nerag kimo mikoshesh. Right? Or either the general public will come to curse the judges, or the relatives of we'll call him the victim of the criminal who was put to death, or other people, because sometimes the punishment doesn't seem to fit the crime. Right? He points to the example of the Mikoshe Tzim, the tree gatherer that we read about at the end of Sefer Bamidbar, where seemingly not so horrible offense resulted in that person being put to death. So people may disagree, may not think that the punishment, the corporal punishment, was fair, and therefore they will curse the judges. Kilalat Elohim. HaKadosh Baruch Hu Omer lo tekalel, lefi sheregilim b'nei adam lekalalam, ulekach lo talin nivlato. And God says, don't curse the judges, since people, natural thing is for people to curse judges, and therefore we have this prohibition against allowing it to remain exposed for too long. Vigam shelo titmat matcha, and also that it shouldn't be some source of tumah, of impurity. She'im lo yaya nikbar yitmeu bo nogea o ma'ahil. If you don't bury the body quickly, then anyone that comes into contact with it will become tameh, will become impure. Okay, so the Rashbam understands kilalat Elohim to mean they will come. It will lead to people cursing the judges, to being upset at the judges. Got it? Okay, Rashi. We'll perhaps come back to Rashi, but Rashi, we'll go a little bit deeper into Rashi depending on how much time we have at the end. But Rashi says, we'll just start over. Oh, so right. So I was telling you how Rashi tries to connect all the separate, seemingly separate, independent, unrelated mitzvot. Rashi tries to connect them, and so he says this is the trail end of that narrative arc that he's trying to weave. Smichut parshiot magid she'im chasim alav avi ve'imo. Right. So the thing that immediately precedes this is the description of the ben sorer umoreh, the wayward and rebellious son. So Rashi says that this commandment about not allowing the corpse to remain exposed for too long comes right on the heels of the Ben Sorer Umoreh. She'im magid she'im chasim alav aviv ve'imo, so she'yitzei letarbut ra ve'yavor averot v'yitchayev mitat beitin. If the parents are overly compassionate to this rebellious child, then in the end he will come to some bad behavior or tarbut ra, bad culture, bad ethics, and he will commit many sins and will be deserving of death. And that's the corpse, that's the criminal that we're talking about, according right in Rashi's attempt to make the parsha all fit together really nice. Right, this is true not only for Ben or Mora. This is true in many situations of capital punishment, but Rashi's trying to build a connection. But here, right, the second part half of Rashi, he says something very interesting. Ki kilalat Elohim talui, because it is the curse of God that is hanging. Zilzulo shel melechu. It is a disgrace. It is a disgrace of the king. How so? Shadam asui bidmot diukano, because man is created in God's image. V'Yisrael heim banav, and the Jewish people are God's children. So what does it mean that it's a curse of God?
That Hashem won't be happy.
Well, I don't think he's saying Hashem won't be happy. He's saying God will be dishonored. Because if you dishonor a corpse, a human body, by extension, you are dishonoring and disgracing God. Again, we have Tselem Elohim. Right, we're created in the image of God. Now that we know that doesn't mean the physical image of God, right? It's the intellect, it's the power to talk, it's the spiritual capacity, but the human body
The
is representative.
Sphirot.
The
Sphirot.
Sphirot, thank you, Anne. It's the right, whatever we understand, whatever Tselem Elohim is, but the physical human body is at least a reminder of the fact that we are created b'Tselem Elohim. So if the human body is disgraced, it is by extension a disgracing of God. And then he gives, right? Yeah,
Also.
mashal. So then Rashi goes on. Mashal lishnei achim te'omim shayu domim ze lazeh. He says it's analogous to twin brothers who look alike. Echad na'aseh melech, ve'echad nitpas lelistiyut v'nitla. One of them is made king, and one of them becomes a criminal, and he is hanged and put to death. Kol haroeh oto omer hamelech talui. Whoever sees the criminal who was hanged will say, "Oh my gosh, the king was put to death." Kol kwalash mikalash. Okay, so we can stop there, right? So Rashi in this parable says, right, that because the wicked brother looks like the king brother, so people are confused and say that if when they see the wicked brother punished, they'll think it was the righteous brother. So too, when people see a human being hanging and being treated disrespectfully, they will think that this is somehow a disgrace of God. Avi doesn't love it.
Sorry, I don't mind it. I think that, like you said definitively, that Tzelem Elohim isn't Demut, and the
Yeah,
example that Rashi gives is Domim Zelatzah. So it's kind of like it's treading close to the idea that no, we look like, I guess maybe you could say representatives of Hashem, right? Instead of
yeah. I mean, I think
being
theologically that's how we would have to translate it as representatives of God. So now if the
okay.
representative God is disgraced, so God is disgraced.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean
Okay.
it's an interesting question. If that is the case, why hang the body at all, right? Why is there any public display if it has the potential to lead to this, right? Where they're it's clearly trying to strike some balance between whatever the proper educative message is, um, and um, and wanting to provide dignity or avoiding of disgrace, of dishonor. Um, okay. The Bechor Shor takes it a slightly different way. The Bechor Shor agrees with Rashi that the word Elohim should be translated here as God, but he says that we're talking about a specific criminal, specific crime. Ki kilalat Elohim talui, Ki al kilalat Elokim atem Adam talui. It says this person, Hari Megadef Niskal Venitla. He says the person who is being punished, who's being hanged, is a Megadef, is a blasphemer, is someone who cursed God. He literally, Kilalat Elohim Talui, the cursor of God, not the computer cursor, but one who curses God, is hanged. A person is right, and that's the punishment. A Megadef, someone who blasphemes, is stoned and I don't even know when to say hanged and when to say hung. So a blasphemer is hanged. Zehu netinat tam lo talin. And this is the reason for lo talin, not to allow the body to remain exposed for too long. לפי שדרך מגדף להיות נתלה, אני אומר לך לא תלין שום נתלה, because a megadef, because a blasphemer is the one who is hanged, God gives us a specific commandment not to leave his body exposed for too long. Shema yomru haroim ze hanitla megadef haya. Lest the people who see him say, this person whose body we see hanging was a megadef, was a blasphemer. Vehirim yad melech v'zehu gnai lamelech. And he rebelled, he said bad things against the king, and remembering his crime and speaking about his crime would be an affront, an insult, a disgrace to God. Mashal adam sheba v'satar melech al panav v'talash laro v'zekeno. So this is analogous to a person who comes and slaps the king and rips out the king's beard. Even though the person is hung and put and killed, it still would be disgraceful to the king if people say so and so. This is what so and so did to the king.
Sounds like a news cycle.
And therefore, we don't allow the corpse to remain.
Sorry. I was going to say it sounds like a news cycle, like control the news, right? Like,
yeah.
Don't let it drag on.
Don't let it drag on, right? We have a similar thing is said, right? The Torah tells us that when Bilam was going to curse Bnei Israel, right? That his donkey was killed also. And it's explained in the Gemara, the reason for that is so, again, that people shouldn't say, oh, this is the donkey who spoke and did the great miracle, and it would be embarrassment to Bilam, right? So there it's a very different application, but this idea that talking about something somehow prolongs it and adds to the disgrace, to the embarrassment is not unique here. So that's the Bechor Shor. The Bechor Shor says Kilalat Elohim refers to the sin or the crime that the person committed. We're gonna go away from that for a little bit and then come back. The Ramban, I wanted to focus, and this is getting us into that shir that I heard from Rabbi Blau. The Ramban, I'm going to focus on a different piece, right? So the pasuk that we read said, don't allow the corpse to remain hanging on the tree for too long, rather bury it on that same day. Ki kilalat Elohim talui, because it is a curse to God for it to be hung. Lo titma et admatcha Hashem lokecha notin lecha nachala, and you shall not defile the land. So the Ramban is going to pick up on this last phrase, lo titma hadama, that you shouldn't defile the land. And the Ramban says as follows. Al dat rabotenu, inenu tam bilvad bavor shelo titma et admatcha. So it's not only that, right, we're going to have to sort of tease out the main point here, but he says it's not only a concern about the land not being defiled. If that were the case, then it would be totally allowed outside of Israel to leave the body hanging. Avalhu lav sheni, but it's an additional prohibition. Hine hamalin hamelin hatalui o afilu hametz ba'aretz over bishnei lavin va'aseh. So, right, so there is a separate imperative to bury quickly, right? And that would be in the realm of kavod hamet, in order to show dignity to the deceased, in order to show dignity to God, if we take Rashi's understanding. But if you leave the corpse exposed, or you leave any dead body exposed and not unburied for a long time in Israel, then you are transgressing two prohibitions. But outside of Israel, there's only one prohibition. Outside of Israel, there's a prohibition relating to kavod hamet, relating to the dignity. In Eretz Yisrael, there is one prohibition about the dignity, which is true in all areas, and there's a second prohibition about defiling the land. And this is learned from the prohibition against leaving the body hanging. Min halav hazek, okay. Kavar Yoshua malchei Canaan biyoman. It's this lav, it's this prohibition which led Joshua, as we'll see in a second, to bury the Canaanite kings during his conquest of the land. Even though these kings weren't blasphemers and they weren't, we'll say, public idolaters, but nonetheless, we'll get to the story in a second. Right? But what was at play was a concern of defiling the land. Okay. So the Ramban says that there's an independent prohibition unique to the land of Israel about defiling the land. And that's only in Israel. And so this there's actually two stories in quick succession in Sefer Yehoshua that show this. So the first is in the conquest of Ayin Yud, in chapter 8 of Joshua, where we see, at Melech Ha'ai Tala al Ha'et ad Eit Ha'erev, Joshua hanged the king of Ai on a tree until evening. Uchevo Hashemesh tziva Yoshua vayoridiu et nivlato min ha'etz, vayashlichu oto el petach shar ha'ir, vayakimu alav gal avanim gadol ad hayom hazeh. And when the sun set, Joshua commanded that they take down the corpse from the tree and they put it in the city gate, and they placed a mound of stones over it, which is there until this very day. The Radak says, Uchevo Hashemesh, when the sun sets, Kmoshe Katuv Lo Talin Nivlato al Ha'etz, the Al Kol HaNitzla Ba'aretz Yisrael Mitzavat HaKatuv. As it says in Sefer Devarim, that we cannot allow the corpse to remain hanging on the tree, and this refers to any body, any corpse which is hanged in the land of Israel. The Torah commands us, right? When it says any body, right, meaning Jew or non-Jew, doesn't matter. And a similar story. Did someone want to say something? Sorry. Similar story in chapter 10 of Joshua. Tell me when I have to scroll down in the English. Vayanusu chameshet hamelachim ha'ele vayechavu b'ma'ara b'Makeda. So the next conquest, Joshua was fighting against 5 local kings, and he chases them, and they hide in a cave in Makeda. So Joshua was told that they are hiding in this cave. Vayomer Yehoshua galu avanim gedolot el pi ha'me'ara. So he says, close up the entrance of the cave with large stones and place guards in front of it. V'atem al ta'amdu ridfu acharei rebechem. This is just the kings who are hiding, but the whole army had run away. So the majority of Joshua's soldiers should go chase their enemy. Zinavtem otem al titnu lavo el ha'areihem ki netanam Hashem lokechem biyadechem. Catch them, don't let them return to their cities. God has given them to you as victory. Right? So Joshua and the army succeeds and it kills all the enemy fighters. וישובו כל העם אל המחנה אל יהושע מקדה בשלום, לא חרץ לפני ישראל לאיש את לשונו. They all returned safely to Joshua in Makeda. None of the Jewish fighters is injured. וישובו כל העם אל המחנה. Sorry. ויאמר יהושע פיתחו את פי המערה והוציאו אלי את חמשת המלאכים האלה מן המערה. Joshua says, open up the cave, take out the 5 kings. ויעשו כן ויוציאו אליו את חמשת המלאכים האלה מן המערה, את מלך ירושלים, את מלך חברון, את מלך ירמות, את מלך לכיש ואת מלך עגלון. You take out the 5 kings, was the king of Jerusalem, the king of Hebron, the king of Yarmut, the king of Lachish, the king of Eglon. ויהי בהוציאם את המלאכים האלה אל יהושע, ויקרא יהושע אל כל איש ישראל, ויאמר אל קציני אנשי המלחמה, הלכו איתו קרבו, שימו את רגליכם על צווארי המלאכים האלה, so Joshua tells the officers, kill these kings. They come and they kill them. ויאמר עליהם יהושע, אל תיראו ואל תחתו, חזקו ואמצו, כי כך יעשה השם לכל אויביכם אשר אתם נלחמים אותם. Joshua says to the entire nation, or to the officers, do not be afraid. Just as you've defeated these kings, God will allow you to defeat all of your enemies. ויאמר עליהם יהושע, אל תיראו ויקים יהושע אחרי כן, וימיתם ויתלם על 5 עצים, ויהיו תלויים על עצים עד הערב. So after these officers kill them, Joshua takes their bodies and hangs them on trees until evening. ויהי לעת בוא השמש, ציווה יהושע ויורידום מעל העצים, וישליכום אל המערה אשר נחבאו שם, וישימו אבנים גדולים על פי המערה עד עצם היום הזה. When the sun set, Joshua commanded them to take down the bodies from the trees, and they put them in the cave where they had been hiding. They placed large stones at the opening of the cave, which is there until this very day. So the Radak here also says, no one told me to scroll down.
Yes.
The Radak here also says, "Vayhi le'et bo hashemesh," when the sun set, "Mipnei tum'at ha'aretz hayu hanitlim nikparim, af al pi she'enam mibnei Yisrael." Because out of a concern for defiling the land, those who were hung were buried even though they're not Jewish. Moshe Omer, "Velo titma et admatcha, ki hamet she'eno nikbar." As it says in Sefer Devarim, do not defile the land, because any body which is not buried is a defilement of the land. So therefore Joshua commanded to do this to the king of Ai and to the 5 kings, and we see it will happen again in the future in the battle of Gog and Magog. So there's this unique concern about defiling the land, which for the Ramban, for the Radak, seems to be the major cause of the Torah's prohibition against lo tali, not to allow the corpse to remain exposed for too long a period of time. Any questions or thoughts, reactions to this so far?
I like the fact that we have Yehoshua actualizing this commandment.
Yeah, we don't always see this, that the
Right.
mitzvah in the Torah is actually carried out, right? It's kind of neat. Okay, with a different source, we're going to come back to Rashi. Okay, so Rashi tells us that the reason why we can't allow the corpse to remain out, again, the Ramban doesn't disagree with Rashi, but he says that's not the driving reason. But right, Rashi says that the only reason we can't leave the corpse out is because of the Tselem Elokim concern. So based on a Mishnah in Pirkei Avot, right? Hopefully this Mishnah is familiar to some of us. Hu haya omer, Chaviv Adam Shnivra B'Tselem. Man, beloved is man, for he was created in the image of God. And because man was created in God's image, there is an extra measure of love reserved for humans, for man. As it says, because man was created in God's image. Havivin Yisrael Re'u banim lamakom. Beloved are the Jewish people who are called children of God. And because of this, they have an extra measure of love. Shne'emar, banim atem lashem elokeichem. It says in Sefer Devarim, you are God, you are children of God. Havivin Yisrael shnitan lahem kli chemda. Beloved is the Jewish people that they were given a precious tool, vessel, right, the Torah. Chibay Torah nodat lahem shnitan lahem kli chemda shebo nivra ha'olam. Shene'emar ki lakach tov natati lachem. And this is there's an extra measure of love given to them that to us that we were given the Torah, we were given this precious vessel, as it says, ki lakach tov natati lachem torati al ta'azovu. I have given you a precious gift. Do not abandon my Torah. Okay, so the beginning of the Mishnah, Chaviv Adam Shnivra B'Tselem, beloved is man who is created in God's image. The Tiferet Yisrael, Rabbi Yisrael Lifshitz, he has two commentaries on the Mishnah, the Yachin and the Boaz. They come together usually, the Yachin u Boaz. So he says as follows, Chaviv Adam, when it says that man is beloved because man was created in God's image, it must mean Nir'eli dehadam girsun hainu afilu akum. This must refer to even non-Jews. And it's a little bit unclear when he says akum here, if he means non-Jew or he means specifically an idolater. But in any case, right, it has to be referring to a non-Jew. Dehari midisayim b'seifa chavivin Yisrael shma min aresha bikol min hadam mayre. Because the second part of the Mishnah discusses the love shown to the Jewish people, so it must be the first half is talking about something which is not unique to the Jewish people, but is a love shown to every human being. Lomar afilu ba'akum, even a non-Jew or even an idolater. V'chein ha'riyah demaite tana mikra de'aseh et adam, and right the verse which the Mishnah brings, which says that man was created in God's image. Hare ba'akum nami mare. Right, this is true even for non-Jews. Livnei Noach ne'emar, because the pasuk was said to Bnei Noach, to Noachites. It wasn't said specifically to Bnei Israel. Vigam melech ai v'chameshet melachim shetala Yehoshua, horidum kodem ha'erev. Shma mina shegam la'akum yesh tselem elokim. And then he brings the psukim from Yehoshua to show, right, Yehoshua was extremely meticulous to lower the bodies before evening of the king of Ai and the five kings of those cities. So we see that it must be that non-Jews, akum, idolaters, have tselem elokim as well, and by extension, the prohibition of leaving the body out, right? He would say is really because of this tselem elokim, no real concern of the tumat haaretz. Right. So we could read this as a real machloket, right? That for the Ramban, the Kilulat Elohim Talui, the right, that it's really about a concern in the Torah is teaching us about the concern of defiling the land, and for the Tiferet Yisrael, for Rashi, it's really all about Tselem Elokim. It doesn't have to be, the Ramban says, I'm not denying that there's this concern for human dignity, but it's really a question of emphasis.
It's a question of what? Emphasis?
Yeah, about which one we're going to emphasize, or what the theological message is to glean out of this. And again, but both may be true.
Is it possible that when Ramban talks about tum'ah, he's talking about disease, or is that not something we could read in? Like
I don't think so, because he says it's only for the land, right? The Ramban was a doctor.
Okay, right.
Right. So if it was a medical concern, I don't know what he knew about germs and disease in that way, but I don't think he would have, if he thought it was a real medical scientific thing, I don't think he would limit it to just Eretz Yisrael.
Right.
And Rabbi Blau pointed out, we know the Ramban was a great Zionist, right? The Ramban was one of the, he made Aliyah, he made it to Eretz Yisrael, but he wrote very passionately. He takes great issue with the Rambam, that the Rambam doesn't include living in Israel as one of the 613 mitzvot. So right, it fits into the Ramban's general worldview also. Um, okay. So with this, we come to, as I said, not everyone was on at the beginning, but in the car ride, bringing Yisrael to the airport and then coming home. So one of the shiurim I listened to was the Pardes podcast, which I've quoted many times, which is hosted by Dr. Yosefa Fogel-Rubel, but she happened this week to be interviewing Rabbi Yitzchak Blau, who is the Rosh Yeshiva of Yisrael's new yeshiva. So that was exciting. So
Who could resist?
Rabbi Blau says as follows. I want to build on this Ramban for a second. I think for many of us, we talk about, right? I'll paraphrase a little bit because this is just the AI transcript. Eretz Yisrael is associated with the mitzvot hatliot ba'aretz, the mitzvot which are unique and dependent on the land, right? Shemitah, Truma, Maaser, right? All the agricultural laws that apply only in Eretz Yisrael. But we would normally think that interpersonal obligations, ethical obligations, it doesn't matter. That they're exactly the same, whether I'm in Israel or Cleveland or London or wherever. But I think there is some evidence that maybe even in the realm of ethics, there's a heightened obligation in the Holy Land. Right? So why would there be this prohibition against Tumat Haaretz about concern that the corpse is going to defile the land, right? Why that doesn't seem to be a typical Tumat Haaretz. So he says that maybe it is saying that there is some heightened moral obligation in Eretz Yisrael as well. And so Dr. Rubel, the host of the podcast, picks up on this, and she says certainly the rest of the world thinks this about Israel, right? All we have to do is open any newspaper nowadays and see the tremendous scrutiny. And we generally take great pride in saying that Israel is the most ethical army in the world, and but it means that we are, we hold ourselves and the world holds us to perhaps an impossibly high standard. Um, Meaning, certainly the rest of the world, without knowing necessarily this pasuk, looks at Israel with what you could say negatively, and say it comes from an anti-Semitic lens. But then there's something about this land that somehow, I don't necessarily agree with all the criticism, that the world outside of here assumes that things here are supposed to function differently. Right? Meaning that there is this idea that we hold and that we are held to, and we can debate whether this is fair or not fair. But there certainly is an idea out there that whether it's unique to Israel, the state of Israel, the Jewish people, wherever we are, but that we are held to some higher standard, and that the concern of Tumat Haaretz, of the land being defiled, is a real concern. And later on, they made reference that that there's some theories that talk about like for example tzara'at, that there can be tzara'at of a house, there can be leprosy affliction of a home. That might also have to do with the heightened spiritual sensitivity that exists in Eretz Yisrael. Right?
I think President Truman really thought that about Israel.
President Truman? Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, I think a lot of people did. Actually, right? I think it's the Ramban, and I remember I'm confusing my sources. I know Rabbi Soloveitchik writes about it, but I think he's quoting the Ramban when God appears to Abraham and says, "Lech lecha me'artzecha mi'moladcha mi'beit avicha." God tells Abraham, "Go, right, leave your land." God never tells El Arz Asher Eka, to the land that I will show you. So Avraham says, and again, I believe this is the Ramban. Avraham says, "How will I know when I get there? How will I know that which land it is?" God didn't give him a map, and so it says that that Avraham went to all the different lands, and when he got to Eretz Yisrael, his spiritual radar, his spiritual antenna, his Wi-Fi connection, he got 5 bars. he knew this was the land. He knew this was the land where God's presence was most intensely felt. He knew this was the most spiritually elevated place. That there is some spiritual quality um, that is there and that is real, and so and that there is this sense of heightened, a need for even greater scrutiny in all areas of life, not just in the agricultural, but that there's some ethical component as well. Um, all right, any questions, reactions, thoughts to what we've said so far?
I find it interesting to to read the land having this extra kedusha
Hmm.
that, you know, I feel like, and this is probably more your realm, right? Like a spiritual thing that crosses over into the physical, to me is confusing. Um, but it sounds like it might be a Sphero thing.
Hmm. Well,
So yeah.
there are many answers to the image. One of them is simply to have a choice in one's behavior, that is a connection with God. And so if someone chooses in the wrong direction, then somehow it implies some kind of uh, um, problem with seeing the body because they did not use their gift properly or something like that. And that's the connection. So there are many ways, obviously, of looking at this, but of course, I love the Sphirot one. But the Rabbi mentioned the powers of the soul. We could just call it that if you'd like. We have incredible power in our soul, and um, we clearly, and that's what Elul is about. It's time to find another place in the soul. All those kinds of things. Was that true of people who are not Jewish? Well, in the days of Mashiach, everyone will understand that about God in a way that they hadn't before. They'll be able to sense a divine presence better. So yeah, it's but the neshama itself is incredibly powerful. So anyway, yeah, but there are many ways of looking at it. I really don't like what Rabbi Kasher has to say. I am sorry, but
Okay. Well,
I, if you
I
want me
think
to
we're gonna
talk for the
leave
next
that.
15 minutes in order to forestall the discussion with him, it's fine with me. I can.
I think we're gonna leave Rabbi Kasher for bonus homework. Anyone that wants to look at it, and with Anne's rousing
Okay.
introduction, I don't know if anyone's gonna be so inclined, but I just end that this in this podcast with Rabbi Blau again. I find the Matan podcast to be quite interesting, and they have really high quality
Hmm.
guests, and they pick up on a lot of
Hmm.
really good things. But in the continuation of the
Hmm.
conversation, they brought it to some practical halachic discussions, right? So one, we mentioned in
Hmm.
general the imperative to bury a body quickly. So one issue there is lo talin, issue of kavod hamet. You know, by and large, um, it's a different conversation nowadays because in addition to whatever metaphysical concern there is, and if there is a true concern about Tuma and in Israel defiling the land, there also is real concern that if a body is not buried quickly, it will begin to deteriorate, it will begin to rot and decompose. And the Gemara talks pretty in some detail about animals coming and shooing them away. So that concern is largely gone nowadays because we have refrigeration. So if someone dies, we're able to at least preserve the physical body in a way that is dignified. And so we have different considerations when, God forbid, scheduling a funeral, scheduling, dealing with these things. That we can balance it with, yes, we want to bury quickly. There is that concern, but there's also, we want to make sure that family is able to come in and that it will be a respectful and dignified funeral service. So we were able to balance those because of the modern technology. So that's one interesting discussion, right? And we still see, unfortunately, right? The volunteers from Zaka who, when there's a terrorist attack, when there's a war, who, you know, I mean, I think it's true for car accidents also, but right, who go and are very meticulous to gather every trace of blood, every fragment of whatever, any remains to be buried and to give it that proper and to show how concerned we are with the dignity of really respecting the body. So that's one interesting area. A second interesting area, we've touched on this many times. I don't know that we've ever given a full share, and if there's interest, we can find the opportunity. Discussion of organ donation. Right, so obviously to harvest organs requires treating, cutting up the body and going and doing things that would seem to be counter to this idea of burying right away and not doing anything to defile. And so that's another interesting discussion. Again, the balance is, well, isn't there great glory and isn't there great kavod to use the body to preserve future life and to preserve the life of others? That's a major consideration. So that's
Two
a second.
pieces. Excuse me, there are two pieces of news from Israel recently.
Mm-hmm.
One is that one of the labs, I believe at Tel Aviv University, but I might be wrong, one of the Israeli universities has succeeded in creating from DNA material a human kidney, which as recently was mentioned in the press because it's now the size of a fetal kidney at age 6 or 7 months of development.
Wow.
And another technological wonder is the development, again, using recombinant DNA and other strange things that Don Arking knows much more about than I certainly do. But they created a replacement for part of the spinal cord.
Yeah, I saw that. That's
and
yeah.
I don't know if it was actually in place yet or it's about to be in place in a person to see if it will work with the rest of it. It is utterly stunning.
Yeah. Right. So that's actually an interesting segue to the next halachic area that I was going to mention, which is the question of donating bodies to science. Right, and specifically use of cadavers in medical school, right? So there was extensive discussion about this even before the founding of the State of Israel. But when Hebrew University opened, they wanted to have a medical school, or maybe it was Shari Tzedek Hospital, whatever. But they wanted to train doctors in Israel, and the question is, can you? Perhaps a little, Rav Kook came down very strongly, and he said we should only use non-Jewish cadavers. We should only use the bodies of non-Jews because of this concern of Tumat Ha'aretz, putting aside the story of Yehoshua, right? But that was Rav Kook's approach, and I think it was Rav Uziel um, said no, we should specifically use Jewish bodies. That's a great honor, and but whatever. So that's another area where this comes up in very real ways. And a final sort of offshoot is the question of autopsies and when does halacha ever permit autopsies, right? So all these it's a little bit morbid. I apologize for that, but all these really interesting uh, modern day discussions we do center very heavily on this issue, right? And so So as I said, we're going to leave Rabbi Kasher for Homer. We don't have enough time, and Anne didn't like it, and we don't want to upset her too much.
No, I'm sorry,
That's
but
okay.
I
That's
just really,
okay. No problem. We don't have to all love it all the time. But anyway, we will end here, right? So, it's an interesting, it's an interesting because we have like a real halacha. We see, right? Interesting to see, as Avi picked up on, the application of the halacha in further stories in Tanakh. That this is a real thing. This isn't just some. Oftentimes, it feels that these mitzvot, which are no longer applicable to us, just sort of all these theoretical, whatever. But no, we see like the real application of it, at least in Sefer Yoshua, still a far way away, a far time away. But I think that's kind of cool. And then it leads to all these interesting theological and philosophical discussions as well, and how those play into contemporary halachic discussions is quite fascinating. So it's an interesting methodological jump. As I said, for me, it was a nice opportunity to bring some of the experience Israel is beginning to get by bringing the Torah of one of his teachers and his soon-to-be teacher. That I don't think they had any classes yet. Today was a icebreaker day and water hikes, and tomorrow I think they go to the Beit Midrash. Um, so that was exciting for me. I hope that you also got something out of it. And hope everyone has a
yes,
wonderful rest of the week. We will hopefully see you all in shul on Shabbos. We have a very special laner this week. Elon Beck will be laning for us.
Wow.
And so that's more incentive to hopefully get everyone out and be in shul. And have a
Yes.
great rest of the week. And we'll see you all hopefully on Shabbos. Bye, Lato.
amen.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
Rabbi, for this
Thank you.
shir.
Thank
You've
you,
raised
Okay.
Rabbi.
the whole
Good night.
question of Kedusha, even. You've raised that whole question.
Yeah.
Great. Yep.